Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how top experts sell their ideas, their value, and their services. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want better clients, bigger deals, and higher fees. I've got the guy that puts cap into capitalize, and I have to tell you, I personally put the fat in infatuation. So I really admire putting the cap into capitalize. The man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Chris Panagiotu. Welcome to the Selling Show.
David, there is no place I would rather be on this fine Monday morning, and I am excited to see wherever this goes.
Yes, well, and it is going places because I've been doing a little bit of digital stalking. And part of the digital stalking is I want to talk about your podcast first, because on the podcast main page, it says, and I have to do my movie voiceover voice, health and fitness focused, God-fearing, a man among men, the host of the Capitalize Your Finances podcast. Here he is, Chris.
Yes.
So talk about, I made the joke about put the cap in the capitalize, put the fat into infatuation.
Yes.
Which is, I might use that myself. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the Capitalize empire. What is it that you do, and what were some interesting professional stops along the way that brought you to the work that you're doing today at Capitalize Your Finances?
Sure. So first off, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to give you the bullet point answer on the business side. So
Great.
For your listeners that don't know, I run the financial planning practice, Capitalize Your Finances. And so what we do is we focus on high net worth families, and they come in and ask anything with money, and we make sure that we help them, whether it's the income side of things, investing once you are in retirement or before retirement, and even as much as the estate planning side of things. Not from a legal standpoint, because I'm not an attorney, I'm too fun for that, but understanding how to invest from an estate planning perspective. And we also construct retirement plans for businesses. So ideally, if someone comes in and they're a successful business owner and they need all the help that they can get, I can come in and construct a retirement plan soup to nuts, and then that basically funnels into their personal financial planning. Very similar to a CPA. Now, on the podcast side of things and the brand, because there's really two separate things. There's Capitalize Your Finances, the business, and then Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast, as well as the book, which we'll get into later in the brand. So during 2020, the year of our Lord and Savior and COVID-19 gracing our lovely shores, that's when the podcast came to fruition. And I think it happened a little earlier than I expected. So for me, I came into a predicament where in 2019, I realized, okay, I've got to start tightening the screws on who I can bring on as a client, because I can't help everyone. No one can help everyone. I say that because that was kind of my brand. Like, we didn't have minimums forever. We didn't have like a niche type of client forever. And for me, I knew, okay, that kills me, because I genuinely love what I do. I mean, you and I have gotten to know each other, David, over the course of this year, and I'm obsessed with what I do. So 2020 hits, and that's a whole nother story on how the podcast came to fruition. But we had some momentum, unnecessary momentum at that. And then in 2021, I went to my old boss before I started my firm, and I said, hey, I think I'd like to give this a go as kind of a side gig, because it was very valuable for me to keep sharp with interviewing all these amazing, successful people, not only in the industry, but now outside of the industry and celebrities. So I also knew that the book was going to eventually come out, but that catapulted earlier because I had fans reaching out saying, when is the book coming out? I'm like, well, I've never even mentioned I'm coming out with a book, but here we are. Now, as far as the brand goes, back to the website, it's really unfortunate that a lot of people today aren't confident about who they are behind the brand. there's also an issue in that sentence because there's a huge differentiator between who people perceive themselves to be in the real world and then who they really are. And I'm not about that. I am the same with you, with my clients, on my show, with my wife, with my baby girl. When I was at a conference last week, I'm the same. And I say that because I knew that, okay, I would rustle some feathers with who I am, but I don't care. I genuinely don't care. And if someone, doesn't want to listen to me for whatever reason, the fact that apparently this is controversial, being super obsessed with my health and fitness, or the fact that I have faith and I believe in God and I was raised Presbyterian and he has helped me get to where I'm at, or the fact that I'm obsessed with bettering people financially, regardless of where they've come from. I just said, I'm going to slap potential listeners and viewers in the mouth with everything that I am, so you know exactly who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So as far as the movement goes, capitalize, like what is a capitalizer? Being Christopher A. Panagiotu, the Captain Capitalize, I teach people across the country how to capitalize on their money. That's what the show is all about. But it's even more than that. For me, I've always considered myself the guinea pig of my movement because let's face it, anyone that starts a brand like I have or what you have, you are the guinea pig. Because if it's worked for you, you're so obsessed with it that you want to give it back to the world. That's why people like us do what we do. But I also knew that, okay, I need to have some backing behind it. And so now that at the point that I'm 32, I've been investing for 22 years, planning since I was 18. I got into drug-free bodybuilding. I can't compete in that anymore because I'm on TRT, but I've lived that life for 11 years. My faith is very, very strong. I'm at this point now where I can say, okay, being a capitalizer is becoming someone that's not just wanting to know the bare bone basics of whatever topic. You become so ruthlessly obsessed with finding the profound truth of a topic that by the time you step into a conversation with someone else, you know that you know it better than anyone else, but it's all for the greater good of moving that person in the right direction. That's what a capitalizer is. That's who I'm about. And that's who my listeners are.
Wow. Yes. 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 And amen. That's amazing. I love ruthlessly obsessed with finding the truth in a given industry or a given field of expertise. So I also want to talk about the book in a little bit more detail because I just love the spirit and the tone of your subtitle. So it's called Capitalize Your Finances. It's on Amazon. It's wherever fine books are sold. Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless. And I want to repeat, compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. So number one, just from a marketing, languaging standpoint, I'm dying to know, Chris, how did you come up with that?
Okay, this is going to be the most anticlimactic story of your life. So Kate Colbert from Silver Tree Publishing, shout out Kate, she was the one that helped me with basically taking my book from Microsoft Word form to, I don't know if this is a word, but it is now, Amazonifying it, right?
Yes.
And you know the deal, right? You
Sure.
don't just take your Word document and put it onto Amazon. There's an expansive christening of the code, if you will.
Yes.
Now, Kate and then George Stevens, who out of South Carolina, shout out to George, who did the artwork and the formatting of the book to make sure it's properly Amazonified. We were on this call and they said, you need a subtitle to your book. I'm like, a subtitle to my book? Like, I didn't think of that. And so, they gave me some ideas here and there. And I remember Kate said, this is going to take a while to figure out. Like, I really want you to think about it, but just text me when you have an idea. I go, okay. So I'm sitting there and after the call, and it was a Friday afternoon, I remember thinking, I'm just going to take like 30 minutes, just silently think, which we can talk about the profound importance of being able to think in silence. But I thought about it and I remember I'm actually in my home office like I am right now. And my wife came home and, yells, hey, babe. And right before I walk out, I go, hey, honey, just let me write this down really quick. And then I'll come out and we'll have dinner or whatever the case is. And I just ripped this thing off, texted it to Kate and George and said, what do you think? Maybe we can tweak it, fine tune it, whatever the case is. After dinner, I just see this expansive explosion of text. And they're like, we love it. This is fantastic. Don't think about it twice. Like, go for it. So it was a pretty lackluster type of thought process, but it really just came down to them asking me and thinking off the cusp. I will say this. This isn't like a braggy thing, and it may come across that way. And for your listeners, if you think that, like, I'm really sorry, but I do best when, like, my marketing team, when I'm in front of the camera, when I'm doing like short reels for Instagram, they rip off a question. And then I don't mean it to be rude, but I'm like, okay, now shut up. So like I can just get this out. Because if I start thinking about it more, then it's like, because my mind is geared to profoundly think at a very critical depth. But if I just rip the Band-Aid off, that's where the marketing comes into play. And I'm sure you can attest to that as well.
Yes. That is so important. Do you love selling? I know, me too. Do you hate selling? I know, me too. Listen, fantastic sales book you got to get your hands on. How do I know? It's mine. That's how. Do It Selling is now available for sale. Grab your copy, grab all the bonuses, all the companion tools, all the training, all the videos that go with it at doitselling.com. See you over there. So let's talk about, because when you and I were talking just casually, one of our friend chats,
yes,
you were just reeling off all these crazy mistakes and assumptions and all kinds of oversights. I mean, really oversights and blind spots, especially high net worth business owners that are making millions of dollars. Maybe they're not taking home millions yet, but their top line revenue is millions. They'd like to have their personal income be millions per year. Tax strategies, tax minimization, various investment vehicles, and again, all legal, all legit, not very well known, and even more rarely practiced because, frankly, perhaps most financial planners, most financial advisors, they're either not a true student of the game, they have the kind of the minimum legally required knowledge, but they don't dig in and dwell on it and obsess on it and find every nuance and every possible angle like you do. Or maybe they're just lazy. But either way, talk to us about some of the compoundingly clueless things that typically when a client comes to you, a high net worth business owner comes to you, you're like, oh my gosh, you're not doing this. You didn't do that. Your guy hasn't been helping you with such and such. What are some of the simple but not easy things that most other advisors miss?
Well, I love that last point, simple but not easy. That's one of my favorite quotes. And I do not take any credit to that. One of the guests I had on earlier this year, Gautam Bade, who wrote The Joys of Compounding, probably one of the best books I've read in the finance space ever. In fact, I was actually upset when it was done because I wanted it to keep going. But that's a little tangent. As far as what are the common mistakes that I see. So I was on Sean Jeter's podcast and he asked me this question in a different way. There's an influencer, Alex Hormozy, who talks about the difference between investing in the S&P 500 or the SME 500. So my business is a little bit different, but if someone comes to me in that regard, generally speaking, I'm going to say you reinvest in yourself, in your business before you take profit and invest it elsewhere. Now, a lot of people can't back that up quantifiably. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when you've got influencers in our industry that say that, but then it's like roo, rah, rah, and they have no numbers to back it up. So I'm going to give you numbers. So David, I don't know anything about your business. I have an idea, but like I have no idea about the specifics. Yeah. And if you came to me and go, Chris, I have an extra, I don't know, $50,000.
That's the example that we worked through previously, which I love.
Yeah. And I don't know where to go with this. Okay. Well, let's look at what you can earn on your return on investment with marketing. And I'll just use my business because it's really, really simple for me. So if I want to spend 50 grand on marketing and advertising, and for me, let's say it took 3 years to get that money back, that means I would have earned a 33% return on my money. Well, I'm going to tell you something. As great of an investor and planner as I'd like to think I am, that ain't happening, at least on a guaranteed standpoint. You may get fortunate if an investment does significantly better, but you can't guarantee that.
Yeah.
So I would tell a client right off the bat, before you start taking these distributions and sending that to me to invest, which could be prudent, if you know your business and after going through this practice that you could earn not only that 33%, but you're also getting a deduction right off the top, because in the tax code, and you get this from a marketing and advertising standpoint, you get to write all that off today, like this year. And so what I tell people, and I tell people this all the time, the greatest investment that you can guarantee other than yourself is actually not an investment. It's the taxes you avoid. And so going back to like your business, let's say that, David Newman is just dancing in the highest tax bracket of all time at like 40%. Well, dude, you just earned 40% on taxes that you're not paying this year, on top of the 33% return once you make all that money back in 3 years. That is amazing. Now, let's say that David Newman or his listeners run, and I'm just gonna make this up, Campbell's Soup. Okay. Campbell's Soup, pretty tough to reinvent the wheel there. And if you eat Campbell's Soup, you've probably eaten it for years. But if you don't, it's going to be really hard to get people on that bandwagon. And so a company like Campbell's Soup, making it really simplistic, are they going to be able to earn that 33% on marketing and advertising? Probably not, because they're such a mature business. Because eventually, right, everything comes to a peak, into a head. And so at that point, if Campbell's came to me and go, gosh, we've got this 50 grand, and they're making more than 50 grand, but 50 grand of hypothetical, we can't find anywhere to reinvest it and earn a good return. Like, in fact, we might not even make any of that back. Well, that's where it becomes prudent to take that money and send it as a dividend to shareholders. Now, for business owners, you are the only shareholder. You're the only person that owns that business. So if you have a business where you cannot find a single place to earn that type of return, that's where I go, okay, let's take this profit. Let's be very systematic with it. Maybe give yourself a little bonus every month because you and your spouse have worked very hard for this. But let's also be systematic on starting to invest outside of your business and outside of yourself, because then the beauty is, let's say that for whatever reason, your business has an off year. Well, if you start to invest outside of it, whether it's stocks, real estate, private equity, private credit, hedge funds, it doesn't really matter, but long-term investments that are paying you today, you then don't have to worry as much about your business. And here lies the emotional brilliance in that. Every year that goes by, if you practice what I just told you, business is going to get a whole heck of a lot easier for you, because you're not depending on your business, which means you can be much more relaxed and calm. And again, my favorite word, prudent on what you need to do, when your competition doesn't have that lever to pull. And that's where you're going to make even more money in the long run. So I could go on a million different tangents on that, but that's some of the common critiques, because a lot of advisors go, oh, do you have 50 grand all invested in blah, blah, blah? And frankly, they don't know what the hell they're doing.
Right. No, that is such a big insight. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Chris, you and I were also talking about that tax situation and then bonuses for the team.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, hey, I'm sitting on an extra 150K. I could keep it and pay the 40%, or I could reward my team, my leadership team, my executives, my C-suite people, right? 40% of that is free. I'm only really paying 60% of it. And now we have an awesome, amazing team who feels appreciated, who's not looking for another job, who's not like, hey, I can make 10 grand more going down the street. So loyalty, retention, culture goes up, and you've invested that money not in stocks and bonds, not in keeping it yourself as profit, but in bonusing the people that help you make your business successful.
And I would even go a step further on that, because that's a really good point. So, like putting my planning hat on, again, most advisors would say, oh, that's where you just need to do a profit sharing contribution into a 401k, get the tax deferral, all your employees will appreciate it. That's all true, but here lies the issue with that. Because a lot of people in our industry go, yeah, I really know my clients. I really get it. But then they always go to those definite answers. Well, what if you work for a company, and let's face it, some of these people that are working for you, they may not be as sophisticated, and they may not have that long-term commitment to your business, but you need these people. So at that point, I would look at that and go, okay, well, here's the deal. If you give them, I'm just going to say, $5,000 each or something. You and I know that if you do that within a profit sharing plan within the 401k, that $5,000 is going to compound on top of the money, blah, blah, blah. And you still get the tax deduction as well as they. However, if they're not thinking that long term, but you still need the people, I would say, okay, give them the option. You want to do it in the 401k, or do you want to just give them a bonus today and give them the independent control? And actually, in the long run, it might retain them a lot more efficiently, even though it's not necessarily the most prudent thing for them and you. So isn't that interesting?
It is. Well, it's about agency and treating people like adults, right?
Yeah.
I love that. So let's go back. I know you mentioned this, thinking in silence. This is not something that most business owners do. So they don't even think in non-silence, but literally white space, thinking time, strategy time, marinating and percolating, letting your own thoughts sort of go through your head as you're observing what's going through your head. Talk about the value of that practice. How do we get started in that? And what's been your experience of some of the benefits of it?
So I'm going to answer the last part first, because there's a story to that. So our show started to take off, I would say, in 2022. And the reason for that is because at the beginning of our show, it was just me being Chris Ray Panagiotu to capitalize, teaching people how to capitalize on their finances. And then also like academics in our industry. Well, unfortunately, no offense to any of the academics, and they all know this, they're pretty boring and they're very technical, and there's no emotional understanding of the client or just human interaction in general.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh gosh, there's an issue there. But that's when I started leaning on to me. And then what was cool was people in our industry started realizing, like non-academics, but our understanding of marketing and all that. So one of our, I would say, big breaks was when I got to interview one of my favorite investors, Robert Hagstrom, who wrote the Warren Buffett Portfolio and Warren Buffett Way. Just to give Robert a plug for your listeners that don't know, he's interviewed Warren Buffett many times. That's how he wrote the 2 books. And he worked under Bill Miller, who is a legendary investor in the space. And if he's not a billionaire, he's rounding third. Okay. So after the episode, and you know this, right? The unwritten rule of podcasting is you schmooze a little bit at the beginning if you're on the video, you do the thing, and then afterwards you've got like a half hour, if you're lucky, of calling to action for each other, collaborating, boom. So I'm thinking, Robert's not going to give me the time of day, but I'm going to milk every second. Well, the episode was an hour, and he gave me another hour afterwards and just unloaded just fatherly wisdom on me. And toward the end of that conversation, and he's one of the greatest guys in the world, I think the world of Robert, he asked me, he goes, Chris, I got a question for you. And at the time I oversaw about $100 million. Today we oversee about 140. And he was saying, okay, so you want to oversee $1 billion by the time you're 40. I go, yeah. And I'm 32 for your listeners. And he goes, that's a pretty admirable thing. I think you can totally do it. But let me ask you this. Do you have a place to go to profoundly think? I was like, that's an interesting question. I go, well, I guess I have my office, or I've got my home office or my conference room. And he goes, nope. And he goes, think deeper. And I kept like going down this rabbit hole with him. And it got to a point where he said, you need a designated place where all you do is profoundly think on behalf of your clients. And the reason why he brought this up was he started rattling off big names in our industry. So Robert Hagstrom, Guy Spear, who's coming on our show on Wednesday out of Zurich, Monish Pabrai out of Texas, Warren, Charlie Munger. All of these people have one thing in common. They have one place that they go where there is nothing other than their ability to profoundly think, period, not just about money. So for me, when we moved and we built out our new office this year, which I'm excited to have you in the studio later this year.
Yes.
We built out, and I was very literal and intentional to this, a thinking room. And so there's no electronics. When that door shuts, my teammate, my amazing assistant, Betty, knows, do not poke the bear, meaning me. I have a little diffuser in there. The color scheme is designed around optimally profound thought for me to absorb knowledge. I'll go in there and read reports. I go in there to think about prospective clients and go, okay, how can I tackle this? And I just sit in thought. And some of my best thoughts and ideas have come from the ability to just be content with myself and sit in silence. And the most successful investors out there do that. You know, why has Warren Buffett lived in Omaha forever? Because there's nothing out there. Why did Guy Spear move from New York and Wall Street to Zurich, Switzerland, which is a pain in the ass to get to? Because of just that. You know, these successful money minds want to separate themselves from the world. And for me, the difference is I'm extroverted. All of these guys are introverted. And it makes it that much more difficult for me because I love people so much. But once I started to implement the idea of the think tank, if you will, my efficiency as everything, a husband, a father, a business owner, a planner, an investor, a podcast, it all skyrocketed. And that's been my experience. And I would tell all of your listeners, you don't have to go as extreme as me. And look, I'm fortunate that I've built out something where I can, that is literally all I go to. But take it a step backwards and just designate a place in your house, maybe in your garage, maybe in your backyard. Maybe you go for a walk and it's on a corner where you look out into the woods, or if you're near water, onto a lake or an ocean, and just have that place where you go. There's no phone, there's no conversation. You need to be content with yourself. And once you understand that, and then you can think about all the most important things in your life, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be beautiful.
Profound, really profound. Hey, if you're loving this episode as much as I am, pop over to doitmarketing.com/manifesto and get your free 37-page download guide to how to sell smarter, sell more easily, sell more often. That's what we're here to help you with at The Selling Show. Off you go. Let's talk about your adventures in podcasting. Because obviously you have Capitalize Your Finances, the book. You have Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast. And as you said, there's kind of the business side of that brand. And then there's the personal brand, the content side of that brand, the education side, the media company, if you will.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how do you bring these two together? So the book and the podcast, tell us how those support the business. And then similarly, how the business supports the podcast and the book, so that more and more people can listen to the financial education, more and more people can get exposed to the book. And whether they work with you or not, hint, work with Chris, but whether they work with you or not, they're better off than if they had not been exposed to your thought leadership. How is that support system, ecosystem coming together?
That's a great question. And initially, when I started the podcast, before the book was even a thought, I actually, and I'm laughing at this because in hindsight, this is really stupid of me, but it was the innocence. And I did not do it for the business. I'm very big on this, and I'm very serious when I step on stage and I'm speaking to people. And it's not like an arrogant thing, but as far as like the podcasting, the book, and the brand and the speaking, I don't need to do any of that. I had a moment in 2021 where, and as you know, I'm a numbers guy. I did the back of the napkin math going, okay, if I just wanted to put this thing in neutral, meaning my business, I know the compounding rate of that, I'm good. I'm totally fine. And I'm so blessed because I remember in 2017 when I almost went under. So I'm super fortunate for that, for my wife, my daughter, we can have the life. But being a man of faith, I also got to a point where I go, okay, so I've invested since I was 10, started advising when I was 18. Like that's very, very unique. And I've noticed all of the big time people in our industry, and actually just like people of influencer clout, the common theme I've seen is they start giving that craft away later in their life. And so by the time the compounding of their goodwill starts to take off, they're gone. So I don't know how long I'm going to be here, right? Knock on wood, hopefully many, many years. But because of what I saw from them, and I'm in a unique spot because I started compounding earlier in my business, I wanted to start that today. And that's where the podcast and the book came about. And so I, for the longest time, didn't think I was really going to get any business from it, which again is so silly because, as you know, it is brilliant marketing. But I really didn't think about it. I mean, I tell people all the time when I was at the Book Thinkers conference last week in Columbus, Ohio, a lot of people would ask other authors, okay, what's the purpose of what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. And there were some great answers, and I forget all of them, but they were very qualitative, but not specifically targeted.
Right.
And then people would ask me, and they're like, what's your purpose with your business and your brand? And I go, I want to become the Ben Graham of planning. And people kind of look and they're like, well, who is that? And for your listeners that don't know, Ben Graham was Warren Buffett's teacher. He was the one that inspired him. He wrote The Intelligent Investor. I read that when I was 10. Didn't understand a lot of it, but I read it. And if you know of any investor that has any clout in the business, they came from the House of Graham. So for me, when I left the big firms and I was working for the family firm I was at before I started Capitalize Your Finances, that firm, Lucia Capital Group, they gave me the ability to learn. And that is the greatest gift I've ever received. So for me, I said, okay, there's got to be on the planning side of the aisle, because again, investing, planning, different things. In planning, there's got to be an equivalent framework that Ben Graham, right, wrote on investing. And I would love to have that as a base framework for my practice, now business. And there wasn't one. There were articles out there, but they were so academically deep. I nerded out on it, but no one was going to read that nor care.
Yeah.
And so here lied the beauty. Back in 2016, I said, that's going to be my next big thing. I am going to write this framework. And what's really cool is now, because you answered on the business side, we are getting business from that. And you would be stunned at how many people DM me, whether it's Instagram or email, saying, hey, I read your book. I've been listening to your show. And this isn't like chump change. Like people are saying, like we had one guy reach out saying, hey, I don't know what to do with this, $5 million real estate property. I'm about to sell it. Like, are there any tax strategies? I'm going, dude, like this is wild. But the biggest thing that I've always focused on is building goodwill. So in investing on a balance sheet, there's this line item called goodwill. And I never really understood what it was. It's very obscure. In goodwill, for your listeners that aren't, nerds like me, goodwill is an asset. It's a piece of ownership. And it's the number that is the difference between what your business is worth and what someone else is willing to pay for it.
Mm.
Now, I'm not going to get into the rabbit hole of how to calculate that with valuing a company, blah, blah, blah. But in real life, goodwill is the most valuable asset that you have. And I've seen people compound their goodwill for upwards of 50 some odd years and lose it in 30 seconds. Okay. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole with my family, but I saw that within my family.
For sure.
And so for me, my whole thing is becoming the Ben Graham of planning. So by the time I'm 60, people can go, I came from the house of capitalize. And I set the stage, whether I'm a planner or just a layman person, on how to capitalize my finances for my family. But in perpetuity, I am all about building my goodwill.
Wow, that's really, really profound. We're about to land the plane, but I cannot let this go because I'm sure our listeners are like, what? What? Newman, ask him about that. Newman, well, you can't let that go. Newman, ask the question. So you've said several times, started investing when I was 10.
Yes.
Tell me about starting investing when you were 10. What was that like? What did you invest in? What did your parents think? Just give us the 3-minute download on that.
Okay. So right before I was 10, and I grew up in a financially literate household. So, for your listeners, not to go down the rabbit hole, but my father, who I've no relationship with anymore, nor do I intend to, he was a Warren Buffett, like, cultish follower. Okay. Which, if you're going to get into one cult, I guess that's a good one to be in. And my mom, and she grew up in a financially literate household. My grandpa was a chemical engineer. My grandma was an administrator for a school. And so I grew up in a above average household in the literacy department. Now, I don't know what happened to me, but my mom, I remember, had Starbucks. And back in the day, that's when Starbucks was taking off. And I don't know why I loved the smell of it. I loved the smell of coffee. She told me not to drink it. Of course, she went in the other room. I took a sip because, duh. I got, verbally just hosed. But then after the verbal crucifixion, I was saying, hey, I want to get in on this. Because for me, I don't know why, I don't know how this came up, but my idea of ownership of a company was like, now that I have Starbucks in my hand, therefore I own it. And again, cut me some slack. I'm 9. Right. And I remember my father was saying, no, you can actually own a piece of this business. And so for my 10th birthday, that's when I got the Intelligent Investor. And my grandparents, my mom's parents at the time, set aside, I don't know, I think it was like $400 for college. And so I was able to take that over and start investing in. The 2 companies I invested in were Starbucks and Microsoft. And even though I didn't understand 99% of what's in the Intelligent Investor, what I did gather is invest in what you know and invest in something that you think will be around forever. And I thought, again, we're in the Pacific Northwest, so super biased on Starbucks, but it was everywhere. And my world was the world. Microsoft was a totally different thing. I've had Crohn's disease my whole life. And so when I was little, I was super into sports, but when my Crohn's got bad, I had to stay inside. And because of that, I wanted to make friends because all my other friends are outside. So I became friends with the gamers. And I remember being obsessed with this computer game, Age of Empires, and it was on Microsoft computers. And that was it. And so my little world was, well, everyone plays Age of Empires on Microsoft Word 97. I didn't care about Microsoft Word or any of that. I don't even know if it was around then. I just knew that video games were my life. And therefore, Microsoft gave me the platform to continue my life.
Yeah.
Now, brilliant timing, because my 10th birthday was May 31st, 2001. Right before crap hit the fan, I made those 2 purchases, and then the net worth basically got cut in half. So I went from 400 to 200. I thought my life was over. But then I remember thinking, I'm going to go read that book again, The Intelligent Investor. I don't know what came over me to go and do that, but I did it. And then I started to realize, wait a second, Starbucks is still around. I'm still playing Age of Empires every day. My mom does not like hearing that. But I looked at those things going, okay, well, they're not going anywhere. And then I started to understand revenue. I'm like, well, they're still making just as much money. So there's got to be some disconnect here between emotion and then what's actually going on. And so, there were little dividends that were paid. And so I'd buy 1 share after a little while and another share here and there. And I'm glad that my heart was broken in 2001 because it quickly taught me the difference between what everyone thinks is happening and what is actually happening in a business.
Interesting. I thought that you were going to say rather that you reread the book and you realized, hey, nothing really changed. And these things are now 50% off. They're half off. So let me go find some more of my own little allowance money and invest when it was worth $200.
Yeah. In hindsight, I wish that was my thought. But, again, it's funny. My parents and my brother were all very, very academically inclined, so to speak, which is politically correct of saying they were all smart. And for me, it's like I liked what I liked. But as far as learning, it's always taken me up until probably the last couple of years, a little bit longer for things to click. But the flip side is once I understand something, again, that's being a capitalizer, it's almost like you're going into battle and you just know you're going to win because you've done the work. It's not an arrogant thing. It's just, I know, okay, I'm not saying I'm Kobe Bryant, but when Kobe Bryant walked onto the basketball court, it's just the compounding of reps and knowledge and all that stuff. By the time he got to where he was at, he looked around and he knew, okay, it's just no one's going to catch up. And of course, he had the God-given gifts and all that. I don't have any of that. Yeah. But I did have the understanding of the more time I put in, good time I've put in, concentrated time, obsessive time with something. By the time I've gotten to this point, it's not that I've done 10,000 hours and I'm just older. I've done 10,000 hours in my crafts and they're so committed that the quality of those 10,000 hours, they're not going to be matched.
Amazing. Well, as we're landing the plane here, I know that folks listening want to get connected and stay connected to more of your brilliance, resources, connections. What can we put in the show notes? How can people connect more with you?
Absolutely. So for those of you that are wanting to buy the book, head on over to Amazon.com, type in Capitalize Your Finances. You can snag it in hardback, paperback, and we just came out with audio last week, which is perfect. And if you're really cheap, you can do the Kindle. Now, if you are wanting to follow along in the podcast, head on over to Spotify, Apple Pod, or YouTube and type in Capitalize Your Finances. If, for whatever reason, you want to become a client of the Cap and Capitalize and you hit our minimums and you're a accredited investor, head on over to capitalizeyourfinances.com, shoot us an email, or email me at chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com. And lastly, if you want to keep in touch on social media, you can head on over to LinkedIn, type in Christopher Panagiotu, head on over to Twitter, Cap and Capitalize, or Instagram, Cap and Capitalize.
Excellent. And all of those links, will be in the show notes directly under this episode. Definitely tune into Chris's podcast. Definitely invest in a copy of the book. And definitely connect with Chris if what you heard today resonates with you. This is a smart guy. I need an injection of intelligent DNA in my financial future. That is what Chris is brilliant at. My friend, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you for having me on. And just to put it full circle, I'm excited to have you on the show. And for your listeners, listen, I've talked to a number of people in the world of sales, in the world of selling and consulting with businesses. David is the real deal. He did not know I was going to say this. If you have not reached out to David, you are living under a rock and you need to do so yesterday.
Thank you, my friend. And I cannot help but agree with your kind statement and very generous observation.
Unbiasedly.
So, thank you. All right. Off to Seattle, off to Tacoma. I'm coming. Be careful. It's coming. And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.